What you're seeing in this video is a clip from my live stream that I do on Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern time on the OBR's YouTube channel. It's a show I call Quincy Carrier Live. So if you want to catch me live on Mondays during the football season, make sure you subscribe to the OBR's YouTube channel. Me and them are doing a collaboration for this year, and I'm going to be live Mondays at 7 p.m. on the OBR. Now, because the temperature is so piping hot on the back of Kevin Stefanski, you know who's been kind of like sliding through all this? Andrew Berry. We really have not talked a ton about Andrew Berry's job security. And I think that's interesting because I don't think you're going to fire Kevin Stefanski and then just keep Andrew Berry and he hires another coach. Have you ever heard how Andrew Berry talks about Kevin Stefanski? I don't think it's fake. He calls him the next Andy Reid. So if you're asking Andrew Berry to make a decision on who you're going to bring in, you're definitely going to ask his input on who you should fire. And he's simply not going to recommend that you fire Kevin Stefanski under this circumstance. And if he's not going to recommend it, then he's probably going to have to go if you make the decision to fire Kevin Stefanski. So not only do we have to talk about, is Kevin somebody we should keep going forward, we should also talk about, is Andrew Berry somebody that you want to hang on to going forward? And this is a very complicated conversation to have, because the biggest thing sitting against Andrew Berry in his resume is something that we do not know how much responsibility he ultimately has at the end of the day. And it's that damn Watson trade. Again, I mentioned this when I was talking about Kevin. I'll mention it with Andrew Berry. We don't know who pounded the table to get Deshaun Watson here. And even then, right, like, I think it is a forgivable stance if the Browns to have wanted to trade for Deshaun Watson. Now, I'm just talking about this from a football standpoint. If you want to argue from a moral standpoint, that's all good and well. I'm just saying from a football standpoint, this was something that was obviously justifiable at the time, right? The Browns weren't the only team that wanted to trade for Watson. There were so many teams that wanted to trade for Watson that there was a legitimate sweepstakes for the services of Deshaun Watson. Like, there were like 12 teams that came bidding. The Houston Texans then narrowed those 12 teams into 4 teams who can offer them what they wanted. That, again, that's how sought after Deshaun was at the time, that not only did 12 teams come a knocking, but also the Texans could just be like, nah, we don't want y'all. Y'all ain't got enough. That is how good how much value was placed on Deshaun Watson at the time. I know his play recently has made that hard to imagine, but we did live through it, right? When the Browns traded for Deshaun Watson, I got a text from some very prominent people and some people I respect in media telling me the Browns finally got a franchise quarterback. People who would never repeat those words today, but people who said that the second he got traded here, right? That is where Deshaun Watson was then. I understand why you traded for him. I don't blame anybody for making that move. Like, who initiated the push to get Deshaun? I don't know how much that matters. It's who decided to keep going once it was wrong. Like, once it was obvious that Deshaun was not going back to that level. And I would say that point of obvious was after the Commanders game. There was no way anybody would ever be convinced that that dude was going to look good this season. He was that bad against the Commanders. And he was that bad leading up to that game against the Commanders. He had 4 of the worst football games he had ever had in his life in this 2024 season. So Who was the driving force behind that? Who was the driving force to bring him here? I don't know. I don't care. It made so much sense at the time. I'm not surprised if it was Kevin, Andrew, and Jimmy Haslam who thought it was a good idea at the time, at least from a football perspective. Because you know who else thought it was a good idea at the time from a football perspective? All of y'all. Everybody thought it was a good idea from a football perspective. The conversation had nothing to do with how good or bad your football team would be if you traded for Deshaun Watson. It was like, hey, man, is this something we actually want to do? Because look at what he's been accused of. That was the conversation with Deshaun Watson in 2020. People trying to retcon it, acting like the conversation was about his level of play. BS. Y'all thought he was going to be great. Everybody thought he was going to be great in 2020. He was coming off an MVP candidate year. We were wondering how long it would take for him to get to that level, how long he would get suspended for. But nobody assumed once Deshaun Watson got traded for the Cleveland Browns that he'd just be awful, right? So you'd be forgiven for making that move under that mindset at that time because that was a forgivable place to be at. That wasn't an outrageous, like it's not like the Browns were the only team that wanted to trade for Deshaun Watson and then made the move. That's not what happened at all. So they make the move. I'm not going to be too critical about how that move gets done. But once the move became rotten, about 4 weeks into the season, why didn't you make a move faster to get off of it? Who was behind that? Was that a Jimmy call? Was that an Andrew Berry call? Was that a Kevin Stefanski call? If it was Kevin Stefanski, he's going to get fired. And then by proxy, Andrew Berry. If it was an Andrew Berry call, he's going to get fired. If it was a Jimmy Haslam call, then everybody's safe. Right? Like when it comes to the whole Watson thing, everybody's safe. That is going to be one of the most important factors in figuring this out. How this season plays out, how they roll out this offseason, the decisions they make or don't make, they're going to tell you a lot about what went on from weeks 4 to 7. Right? Why there was still this push to not only keep Deshaun as the starter once it became obvious that he could not play starting quarterback in the NFL anymore, but also to reaffirm him in the media as a starter. Whoever was behind that push probably got to go unless it's the owner. And if it's the owner that made that push, and now since the Achilles injury happened, the owner no longer wants to make that push, then everybody's safe. But if it was like Andrew Berry being like, no, we're going to win this trade. We're going to keep playing Deshaun in there. All right, Andrew, you got to go. I do think it's interesting because if win percentages weren't a part of it, right? If Kevin didn't have such a bad record, I do think there's a world where like Kevin keeps his job, but Andrew doesn't. I don't think there's a world where Kevin gets fired, but Andrew doesn't. I'd be surprised. Maybe I'm just gearing myself up to be surprised. This whole season has been a surprise to me. So you know what? I wouldn't even be surprised if I was surprised at this point. But nonetheless, the Watson thing, right? That's the first thing you got to talk about when you talk about if Andrew Berry's on the hot seat. The question about how much he's responsible for ultimately, don't none of us know. We all don't know. Everybody who say they know, they just guessing. Don't nobody know. The only people that know are Andrew Berry, are Kevin Stefanski, and are Jimmy Haslam and D. Haslam. Those people who know. Maybe the top lieutenants in the Browns organization know, but at the end of the day, that's who knows. Let's talk about Andrew Berry's work. Because outside of the Watson trade, we got to talk about his work. And again, this is difficult to evaluate. Because the draft does not get evaluated on a year-by-year basis. We don't look at the 2024 draft after the 2024 season and go, oh, nobody made the Pro Bowl. That draft stunk forever. That's not how it works. These players are not expected to do much in their first couple of years in the league, and then you judge them based on what they do 3-4 years out. Right now, we only have 3 drafts to look at for Andrew Berry. Let's look at the 2020 draft, right? The 2020 draft, the Browns select Jedrick Wills, 10th overall. That's a miss. I think there was a time where it felt like it was kind of okay that you drafted Jed Wills, but it wasn't the greatest choice you could have made. Now it looks like a miss. You look at all the offensive tackles that went in that class, you can argue you probably got the worst one that went in the first round at the very least. In the second round, you got Grant Delpit. That was a win. That was an absolute win. That's an extension-worthy player in the second round. That's one of your critical pieces on the defense. Grant Delpit, second-round pick. Really good pick there by Andrew Berry. Then you get to day 3. Now, the bar for day 3 is significantly lower than the bar for day 1 or day 2. Day 1 or day 2, you want extension-worthy starters. Day 3, you're happy if a dude is still in the league after 4 years. Jordan Elliott, not the greatest third-round pick in the world, but he still plays. He got a second contract with the 49ers. It's a fine enough pick. I call it neutral. Jacob Phillips, not a great pick there at 97. Harrison Bryant in the 4th round, fine pick there. Was a starter for you, was a useful player for you for 4 years and still in the NFL. Nick Harris in the 5th round, that's a fine pick. Donovan Peoples-Jones, that's a pretty good pick there in the 6th round. So in the 2020 draft, of the day 3 guys, I think 3 out of the 5 that they selected were good. Of the day 2 guys that they selected, all one of them. Well, no, day 2 is round 2 and 3. So of the day 3 guys, Harrison Bryant, Nick Harris, Donovan Peoples-Jones, good job. That was a great day 3 for Andrew Berry. Day 2 guys, I thought that they did pretty good on everything except for Jacob Phillips. So 2 out of 3 there. Round 1, you swung and missed. Overall, it's like a C+ draft, 2020. All right, let's go to 2021. 2021 is an interesting year. In the first round, you get Greg Newsome. Now, Greg Newsome's not a swing and miss like Jed Wills. Greg Newsome is just okay. Like, it's a neutral pick. It's a first-round pick a lot of teams make where it's like, hey, he's fine. He can start. He's not like the greatest player. He's not a superstar. He's also obviously not trash. Makes a couple plays, has made a couple of really big plays for the Cleveland Browns. Absolutely. It's not like you drafted, what's his name, Justin Gilbert? So, it's a neutral first pick. Like, he didn't become the heir apparent to Denzel Ward like you hoped. He didn't become your shutdown number 2 corner, but he's only not the number 2 corner because you hit on somebody bigger in next year's draft in Martin Emerson in the 3rd round, right? If that weren't the case, Greg Newsome would definitely be your number 2 corner, and you would be fine with Greg Newsome as your number 2 corner. I know people online don't like him, but he's a fine corner, right? So Greg Newsome, that's neutral. JOK, big hit for JOK. So round 1, you went neutral there. Round 2, you swung big and you hit big. You traded up for Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah and you hit big. You swung big in the 3rd round too with Anthony Schwartz. You missed. He stunk. He was bad. There's no redeeming that pick. It's a bad pick. Day 3, you draft James Hudson, Tommy Togiai, Tony Fields, Richie LeCounte, Demetric Felton. I would say James Hudson was worth the 4th round pick. Tony Fields was worth the 5th round pick. Everybody else, not really worth it. So 2 out of those 5. Overall, I would say you got JOK in this draft. Greg Newsome's not bad. I would say this is a C+ to a B- draft in 2021. And then the last draft that we could truly evaluate is 2022. Now, we'll look at the other 2 classes, the more recent ones, just to hover over them, but we're not going to make any determinations over 23 and 24 today because it's just too early. But let's look at 2022. You get Martin Emerson. Now, Martin's having a down year, but I believe he'll bounce back and be a really good player going forward. He'll be fine. That's a home run. Alex Wright looks like he'll be a solid player, so that's a good pick there. Again, all these are this is day 2. David Bell didn't work out. So if your day 2 picks, 2 out of 3 are fine. You get a home run with Martin Emerson. You're good. Day 3 picks. Perion Winfrey did not work out. Cade York did not work out. Jerome Ford as a 5th round pick. It's a neutral, right? Like, he provided about as much as you would expect from a 5th round pick. He got some moments, but he wasn't too great, right? Michael Woods, nope. Isaiah Thomas, 7th round pick. I guess you could call that a win, but like at this point, he was a 7th round pick. I call it neutral. It's not going to change how you feel about the draft. Dawson Deaton, 7th round pick. I haven't heard him since. You got Martin Emerson out this draft, and this is a draft class where you've had 3 top 100 picks, really 2 top 100 picks, because one of those picks was 99. I'd say you got Martin out of this. So a C draft. So draft history for Andrew Berry, it's not as bad as some people make it out to be, but it's also not as good as some people make it out to be, right? People act like Andrew Berry does nothing but hit homers. He's hit a couple of them, right? Like, you got some really good players. Greg Newsome is a fine player. JOK is a really good player. Grant Delpit is a really good player. Martin Emerson's going to continue to be a really good player once he gets his next season under his belt. He's struggling right now, but I believe him to be a pretty damn good player in the long run. Then we can just glaze over these next 2 drafts. 2023, Siaki Ika, and obviously that didn't work out. And that's the only one we can write off in 2023. Cedric Tillman is turning it around, so he might be worthwhile. DeJuan Jones has been pretty good for the team. Isaiah McGuire, day 3 pick, has been pretty good for the team. DTR, we'll see if he could be a backup. If he could be a backup, that's a win for a 5th-round pick. Cam Mitchell, pretty good for a 5th-round pick. Luke Whippler, we'll see next year once he gets a chance to play. But all of one pick from 2023 is still up for evaluation. And then everybody that you drafted that wasn't like in the 6th or 7th round is still up for evaluation in 2024. So there's not much to talk about there. Mike Hall does look good, but Mike Hall is on injured reserve right now, so we're not going to get to see him until the end of this season. So draft-wise, I think Andrew has been a solid drafter. It is worth noting that of the 3 draft classes that we went over, one of those were the ones where he didn't have a 1st-round pick. So it's not like I'm evaluating him strictly off of when he did not have a 1st-round pick. And you can argue the most disappointing picks that he's had are his 1st-round picks, which you don't love, right? But he's only had 2 1st-round picks to choose from since 2020, and it's not a big sample to pick from or to make determinations about. Another thing we want to look at with Andrew Berry is how well did he build bridges. Now, when I say bridges, I'm talking about the ability to go from one position player on an expiring contract to a new position player, right? How well did he bridge the gap between position players? That is something that you have to look at when it comes to Andrew Berry, and let's see how he did there. I have 5 position groups I think he did a good job bridging the gap with. Right tackle, DeJuan Jones, Jack Conklin, that's a good bridge. Wide receiver, they did a good job bridging that, right? Jerry Jeudy looks great. Cedric Tillman has looked great. I'm satisfied with the bridge they built to get them through getting rid of Amari Cooper. I think they did a good job building that bridge. Defensive back, they did so good at building that bridge don't even exist anymore. Greg Newsome not going to be here after his contract runs out because Martin Emerson is so good. And then you were excited about Cam Mitchell. They did a good job building that defensive back bridge. Linebacker bridge, they went from nothing to JOK. That's a good bridge to me. And then safety bridge, they did a pretty damn good job with the safety bridge. You like Ronnie Hickman, you can like Grant Delpit, D'Anthony Bell. They got a lot of good young bridge players there, or players who could start and be really good starters there. So that's 5 bridges I think he did a good job with. There's 3 bridges I'm not sure. Defensive line, I like Isaiah McGuire. I like Michael Hall, but it's way too early for me to determine that a win right now. So Alex Wright, right? He looked pretty good to start the season. He didn't play the whole season. So next year, I'll be able to determine that defensive line bridge a lot better. Interior offensive line bridge, this almost relies entirely on Luke Whippler and Zach Center. Both of those guys are too young to judge at this point. QB bridge, I think that starts this year. I think the Browns were under the impression they had a franchise quarterback the last few years, right, and reasonably so. Now that they know they don't have one, we'll see what bridge they build, and we'll judge that as that time comes. And then the non-existent or insufficient bridges that I think they have not done a great job. Running back, tight end, left tackle. Running back, I think they failed that position group as far as bridging it, simply because they did not spend any resources above a 5th-round pick to fill that running back room up. They only drafted Jerome Ford. They did not swing on any other running backs when they should have. They didn't build a bridge there. They'll have a chance to build a bridge this offseason because this is a loaded running back class, but from 2020 on, they didn't do anything at running back. And I think knowing when you had Kareem Hunt and that wasn't a player you wanted to keep long-term, you should have drafted somebody with a 3rd-round pick or something like that. A prospect that you felt very good about it being a starter a little bit earlier than 2025. Tight end bridge, I mean, do I have to explain it? Like, there's no heir apparent to David Njoku or even Jordan Akins right now. That's something that you're going to have to spend on this draft. And look, this draft, you're going to get fortunate. They have a bunch of tight ends and a bunch of running backs. But you didn't spend one there. Left tackle bridge. This is inexcusable to me because you had an opportunity to draft left tackle last year. Tons of opportunity to draft left tackle. Did not take any of those opportunities. Is what it is. No left tackle bridge being built there. So if we look at the bridges, 5 of them are fine. 3 of them are to be determined, and 3 of them are just flat bad bridges. We'll see. Overall, how do I feel about Kevin Stefanski? Not Kevin Stefanski, about Andrew Berry. I will say this. I think he's been a slightly above average general manager. I think his strength is in the stuff that doesn't show up when we do these kind of evaluations, right? His strength is in salary cap management. His strength is in trade manipulation, right? And trade outcomes. I think he's had a lot of good trade outcomes outside of Deshaun Watson. Again, we don't know who was the driving force behind that. I think he's really good at the technical stuff, but when it comes to the selecting of players, he is slightly above average. He's not amazing. He's not unfollowable, but he's not bad at it.